on stage, and I will be joining them, are our moderator, Jenn Pratt, who is the Partnerships Director at Artsy. Artsy is also our partner for the entire Dialogues program. She is joined by Marc-Olivier Wahler, who is the Director of the MA, Musée d'Art et d'Histoire in Geneva, and Nicole Sales-Giles, who is the VP and Director of Digital Art Sales at Christie's. I will be joining them with a very different hat as an AI-generated artist and as part of the Contemporary Istanbul Foundation.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be exploring the exciting topic of can we make peace with AI-generated art, a topic that is much contested, quite controversial among some people, and it'll be interesting to explore this conversation with our experts today. I'm particularly interested in sort of the various segments of the market that we're able to represent. Marc-Olivier from the institutional side, Nicole obviously from Christie's, which is the commercial side of the market, and then we'll close with Sarp, who is a practicing artist using AI-generated art, and have an opportunity to look through some of the works that he's produced using this technology. As technology continues to evolve and the future comes at us at a faster pace than we can all handle in some cases, AI-generated art has sparked fascination and wide debate. Some celebrate it as a revolutionary tool for creativity. There's also questions around authorship, originality, that are really the issues that we are still kind of trying to understand as a community within the art market and in the art world. AI-generated artworks created with the assistance of artificial intelligence systems. This includes various forms such as images, music, and text, where AI algorithms analyze the inputs that the artist serves into the engine, and then creates, and then we get the final creation as the output that the artist has then kind of indicated and selected. While AI can produce art, it is really a collaboration between the human artist interacting with the engine, and it is this interaction that really creates the final results that we see at the end of the day. It's quite a complex topic, so I hope to serve you sort of an introductory purview of what is being discussed on the market. We'll discuss 3 topics and then take a look through some of Sarp's artworks and understand what it looks like, what his process is, and what the final result of this creative integrity is. I'll start with Marc-Olivier, actually, coming from the institutional side at the MAH Museum. How does AI-generated art compare to previous technological advances in art, such as digital media? And who should be considered the author of an AI-generated artwork, the artist or the AI itself?
Well, I think it's definitely the artist who is using the AI as a tool. So, I mean, as long as it remains in that way of doing things, yes, definitely the artist is the prompter, I guess, so he tells the machine what to expect. And then he chooses, I mean, he has the final cut anyway. So I guess he's the artist, and definitely.
Yeah. I know that you have really been a pioneer in introducing these types of works and new media works into sort of a museum institutional framework. Can you tell us a little bit about what the hesitation is and what the concerns are as people are learning to adapt and accept this medium of artwork?
Well, I think, people are, of course, always afraid that the tools they use are going to overwhelm them and then take the position and decide for the visitors, for themselves, and of course that's normal expectation. But so far it's, AI is powerful, of course, but it's still used in a way that it's not like a majority of image you see. It's not the majority of art. It's still a totally minority. It's still in the cracks of the system. So it's not so, it's not so scary for the moment.
Yeah. I mean, I think what we're seeing now is this segment of the market really at its nascent stage, and no doubt we will continue seeing it grow throughout the years. Sarp, as an artist practicing this, for some context, one of the first times I met Sarp was at APAD, which is the American Photographer Fair taking place in New York. And Sarp was the only artist exhibiting in that fair with photography produced using AI-generated artworks. I would love to know sort of what your experience was in creating it, but also on a commercial side, as you're presenting this artwork, how is it received in a fair which is really representing more traditional photography? You were really pioneering that there.
Well, the running joke is that I'm waiting for someone from Kodak to come with there will be like a laser on my forehead, and like someone will just shoot me and go, "You betrayed photography." And I feel as though a lot of the resistance and a lot of the skepticism towards AI-generated works is this misconception that there isn't sufficient artistic labor present, that the artist is not a part of the process, that the artist is not making decisions about the process or the outcome. And I can safely tell you, as someone who has spent so many sleepless nights screaming at my laptop at 3 a.m. over the last 3 years, that there is, in fact, a tremendous amount of decision-making and a tremendous amount of control still present. Some of the skepticism, I think, comes from the residual impact of the first NFT bubble, because I think there's this sort of general cynicism towards digital art, no matter how it's made. And I think maybe it'll take time for us to sort of move away from the hyper-commodification of digital works and into a place where we can look at a digital work of art and say, okay, the artist is in fact a part of the process and has been thoughtful in the generation of the final product. In my experience, what I've enjoyed tremendously is that as a photographer, as a traditional photographer who's used cameras and the darkroom for more than 15 years, I am working in a way that has me filled with surprise and joy every single day. And that has not been my experience as a traditional photographer. I have never had this much fun. I have never been this surprised, not because of a lack of control, but because for the first time in my life, I feel as though I'm trying to build something together, maybe with a really stubborn and really intelligent 2-year-old baby. So it understands what you're saying, but it also has its opinion of what you want, and you're just trying to constantly find the middle ground, which is a very different way of working than when you're working with a camera that, for the most part, behaves the way you expect it to behave. So there's an unpredictability there that isn't a lack of intention or a lack of control, but just, I would say, is a possibility and an element for surprise.
It sounds like it's allowed you to sort of broaden the boundaries with which traditional photography might have been working in.
Absolutely.
And to be able to experiment kind of beyond the original lens-based artwork there.
Well, the crazy thing is, and I know that we needed to come up with terminology fast to differentiate between AI-generated photographs and classical photographs, and we save lens-based a lot. But the way I work is after I generate the image, I expose it onto a real Polaroid. And in that process, I use either a small enlarger called a Polaroid Lab, or most recently in Vienna, I used an actual large format Polaroid machine, but I tweaked it so that it functioned as an enlarger. And in both cases, there is a lens there. So my AI-generated images are lens-based. So I don't know if that's actually
really
moving forward. I don't know if that's the best terminology to be using to create that distinction.
Right, perhaps that distinction is blurred moving forward in cases like that. In terms of the market, how does the market value AI-generated art compared to human-made art, if we were to boil that down a little bit? And what factors influence that type of perception? Nicole, maybe from a Christie's perspective, it'd be interesting to hear. I know that you have a sale coming up focused on AI-generated art.
Sure. So I'm going to take a step back a bit. So I focus exclusively on digital art in the broad sense of what that means at Christie's. And we are a small, newly formed team that sits within our contemporary art division. So we definitely think of digital art, AI art, new media art, name your term, as part of contemporary art. It's just a way to describe the creation process from the artist. So in terms of the market reception to AI-specific art, we are very, very, very early. I mean, Christie's is historically not a primary market institution. So generally Christie's has to wait a bit for the secondary market to catch up in order to sort of see something meaningful at an auction house. That being said, most of what my team does now is in the primary art space. So we don't really see ourselves as competitors with galleries, but we're sort of enhancing that opportunity where an artist can have success at a gallery and then they can then release sort of an apex of their collection or something bigger or a one-time moment with Christie's, and that's sort of how we've been positioning ourselves. So in terms of the AI art market, it is very, very early to say. I mean, we have sold successfully a handful of artists that have worked with AI mediums. Sasha Stiles is an excellent example. I love her. She works with poetry, and she talks a lot about the collaboration process between her AI-generated model that is actually trained on her prior artworks as opposed to trained on all of the data that exists in the world. So it's an interesting sort of commentary on the collaboration between, as you were saying earlier, between AI and the human artist, as well as, for example, Holly Hernan and Matt Durst, who is part of the Whitney Biennial. They're very accomplished. They also have a solo show at the Serpentine in London right now. We've also had some success with Bado, who is a DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, which is also focused on AI. It's a bit nuanced of a project, but they're having a lot of success in sort of combining the NFT market and the AI market. So there are a lot of artists that are experimenting with AI, and you did allude to that. So in February, Christie's will be having our first of its kind at a major auction house, an specific AI art sale in February, March of next year during our Contemporary Art Week. So we're really excited about that. So we are in the early stages of planning, but we're actively looking for artists to work with on that.
Fantastic. You know, it's really the institutions, both Christie's and MAH, for example, that kind of help us in a way sort of validate this within the market, right? I think prior to this, practicing artists are bringing it to fairs, selling it directly, selling it with their galleries, but having an institution kind of really recognize it as an art piece tells us all, okay, we need to start paying attention. The NFT sort of digital phase, flash, that we all saw witness kind of over COVID, sort of kind of had its dip, right? And we're all kind of trying to define now where that sits, as was earlier explored in the panel just before this one. But it'll be interesting to see as these institutions recognize this medium, that it goes into more of an art historical canon, right? Do you have any thoughts on that, Marc-Olivier? I mean, how would you context it in an art historical context?
Well, I think everyone agrees that AI is like in its infancy, I would say, and it remembers a little bit, when the photography started in the 18th century. And if you remember, from what we learn, art history, when we weren't there, of course. So what's interesting is that they start mimicking the painting, especially like the historical painting, la grande histoire, and that was the first move, like trying to be like the big guys, and then little by little, of course, photography, took its autonomy, and I think what we see with AI is a little bit the same, like for the moment AI is quite interested and obsessed in a way with images, producing new type of images, producing new types of text, like new poems, new novel, new big type of image. And I think this is only the beginning. But if you think of what the AI is capable of course, it will do something we don't imagine yet, And then I think you mentioned this generative, auto-generative, between all this, like between text, between images, between collaboration between artists, between machines, and it will create something we are not even aware of. And that's what is, of course, challenging in our brain, but is fantastic. We are living in a moment which I think is totally fantastic. because we
Yeah.
don't know yet.
Yeah, truly.
I think it's very emblematic of the generation and emblematic of what art should be, of the advent of photography in what 1850s, was it 1860s? That was very representative of that time, right? And to answer your earlier, I think you mentioned, it's not so scary right now. I mean, photography didn't replace portraiture of portraiture painting. We
Right.
still have people painting portraits today, and so I think there's something similar to be said about that.
Yeah.
But also you have to think about the whole context of how AI is visible on which medium, on which hardware, because like it needs hardware and it needs a medium to appear.
Yeah.
And I think this is very interesting because now we think about like AI being printed or on a screen but this will be totally different. Think about the BMW project and AI. It's fantastic. We're just at the beginning.
I think we actually have a question. Can we get a microphone? Can we get a microphone? It seemed to be a burning question, so I'm sorry, I'm like taking over your moderation.
No, I'd love to hear this question.
Hi guys.
Hi.
Thank you. Look, thank you very much for your remarks. I appreciate all the remarks for all of you. And I have a foundation based in Brussels, and the foundation is it's a new foundation and we focus about digital art. Recently, the foundation has been giving the first edition of AI prize, and one of the members of the jury was an AI. And I can tell you because all of you have been talking about misconception about the AI, but I totally, you are right in a sense. But in our prize, we had the theme of the prize, of the AI prize, was about the future of the desert. And we had an open call with 350 participants, and we have in the jury we have 7 members. One of the jury was an AI which has been created by one artist, which is a French Canadian, which is Chatonsky. And I can tell you, for him it was very simple because he created a dialogue about the theme because we have to use all the content of all the participants to give a notation. It was a physical jury plus AI, and finally, it was very amazing because AI gave the best notation rank to the physical, to the choice from the physical jury, and it was amazing. But today, when you talk about your own team, you talk about the piece, and I can tell you, I did participate to an exhibition about the peace with United Nations a long time ago. It was in Geneva. It was about visual art. We have been using kids for this exhibition to paint about the peace. And today I think for you it should be quite easy to use the AI in a simple dialogue with artists. Definitely you need the artist because the artist will do all the work. The artist will just tune the conversation with the machine, but it should be demystified, and I think the guy who is an artist should confirm that finally, it's not so complicated to have a discussion with a computer and to create your team about the piece. And I think it's quite basically simple to go ahead with the piece, and that's why we are coming here today, And
thank you.
Thank you. It's interesting to hear about the AI judge.
Yeah, that sounds really cool, actually.
I'd love to hear more about that later. We spoke a little bit last night. I'll call find you after this. I guess the idea of audience also comes to mind, right? When somebody is visiting your museum, do you find that you need to offer a little bit more education or a little bit more context so that somebody understands what it is they're looking at? How are we helping the audience understand what the evolution is in AI-generated art? Are there initiatives that you have in particular in support of this? I mean, how do you deal with this with a general audience?
Yeah, it's a whole context. So when the visitor is coming into the museum, he doesn't discover AI-generated art like that. He is part of the whole. It's part of the whole education program. When he enters the museum, he is part of a kind of a new way of discovering the museum through an app, through different tools, AI-generated tools as well, and AI art or whatever project it is integrated in the education program. It's really part of it. It's not just something
It's not a separate...
presented as a, I don't know, like something on the wall or
Yeah.
like as a painting, but it is part of overall context.
Yeah, yeah. And I ask that because I think the times that I've seen it presented, it is sort of presented as a separate thing, and I think it's the integration of that into the dialogues and the art history that we're all familiar with and comfortable with, that's important. It's to that it's one large conversation to happen.
But also, for example, it goes reverse. The icon, for example, in our museum, our icon is 1444 painting, which is considered as the first realistic landscape in the Western art history. Okay, so basically you see the miracle of the fisherman, and you see Jesus basically walking on the Lake Geneva, which is quite interesting. But then if you use this image on video games, and if you go on specific video games, you can buy the ability of walking on the lake or on water. For example, if you need to go to point A to point B, you can swim there, but it takes time. Or you can buy a small boat, or you can buy the ability of walking on the water. And then if you do that, then of course it's AI generated, it's the whole thing, but it also goes with our collection. You know, it's not just a new type of art that comes out of nowhere, it's also coming from the collection.
Yeah, yeah. In terms of collecting, I'm curious, and maybe I'll start with you, Sarp, from the artist's perspective. Do you find, I mean, from when you were working with traditional photography to what you're working with now, is it a different collector? Are you having to, I mean, is it a different person? How are you able to engage with this person? Has it changed your process?
It's been actually tremendously interesting because I've had 4 exhibitions now of AI-generated work, and the first exhibition that I had with it was using Midjourney, where it was trained on the entire internet, and some of those are the ones that we can show on the slides. And then my subsequent show, that was in New York with Palo Gallery. The subsequent one was with Anna Laudel Gallery here in Istanbul, and it was actually my biggest solo show ever. And I said, I know this is a big, risky move, but we have 2 floors. Why don't we have one floor where it's my former work with, you know, the kind of photography everyone is okay with, and why don't we devote an entire floor to work where I will train an AI on my own practice, on my own history, and I will ask the machine to then generate things based on how I trained it. And a lot of people feel like training AI involves coding, but in this case, I did it using a company called Layer AI, and it's mostly for video games. But it gives you an empty drive, kind of like uploading something on Google Drive, and it says, upload an image to me. You upload it, and then it says, okay, tell me what is in this. So if I say, hey, this is pink, then it will forever think of the color black as the color pink. So if I ask for pink skies, it will give me black skies. So you're teaching something from scratch, and it will not resist you. And anatomically, it was not correct. Architecturally, it was not correct. But the way in which it was making decisions, I realized it was mimicking my decision-making in how I frame a scene, in how I place my models, in the way I light them, and in the way I was referencing even chiaroscuro lighting from my old college works, all the way to the present, where I reference a lot of Turkish architecture and hammams. And it understood me in a way that I feel like maybe a psychoanalyst would have understood me 10 years after therapy, which was very revealing and vulnerable, but also quite delightful to be dealing with an algorithm that was like, oh, I understand exactly the way your imagination works.
Like a mirror.
And surprisingly, or perhaps not surprisingly, the works that I did with Midjourney that were much more classical and sort of proper, those have been placed in some prominent collections, including the Leslie Lohman Museum of Art in New York, and I became the first AI-generated work to be part of that collection. But the works that I did where I trained the AI, people were like, we don't know, we're not sure, maybe later. So the fact that even though people are talking about ownership and sort of the ethical dimensions of how AI is trained, the AI that was trained on basically images from all over the world, people were comfortable buying and investing and placing in museum collections, and the AI that I ethically trained, they were kind of reluctant to be involved with.
Why is that, do you think?
Well, I think there's an anatomical issue there, because an AI needs to look at 1 million people before it understands what a human looks like. And with my images, I don't have 1 million photographs. I maybe have 2,000 total, including like stuff I haven't shown. That's not enough anatomical reference for it to be correct. So then they were all kind of dreamy, which I loved. I thought that was really exciting, but I guess that was just for me.
That's really fascinating, that it's really kind of mirroring, obviously, what you put into it, right? It's only able to work with what you tell it to work with. Are there, in which case, and obviously Midjourney is accessible to everybody, you can get on Midjourney and create something of your own using sort of the broader universal database. Is there at any point you would say it becomes sort of not okay? When is it sort of relying too much on the AI versus the artist's interaction?
Well, this is a hot topic right now, because the United States Copyright Office insists that if you just write what you want to see and you generate an image, that alone you cannot get copyright for. Now, I say this as someone who doesn't care about copyright. I have never copyrighted anything in my life, but the assumption is that as an artist, if I make something, it's automatically protected within reason. I would argue that when you're asking for something as an exploration and it's just one sentence, like, give me, the golden horn on a sunny afternoon, that's so generic and so simple that maybe nobody owns that. But if you saw my prompts, which are usually a page, maybe 2 pages long, and it involves things like, 2 men in the style of Robert Mapplethorpe if they were directed by Alejandro Jodorowsky with a 30-degree angle, backlight coming in, and shot on Kodak Ektar 100 speed film, so I'm using technical and narrative language to set up the scene, then I would argue that should be protected, and that should be given some more dignity, perhaps, if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. It made me think also, through this process, does it help you also better define your creative concept as you're going into it? Because, like you said, you have 2 pages of, ideas, instructions, details that you're including, reference points that you're including. Mm-hmm. Has that become more defined when you're using AI versus when you were shooting regular photography?
Well, the initial motivation was, how do you, if I say apple, how many of you picture a red apple? You can raise your hands. When I say apple, do you picture a red? Okay, when I say apple, how many of you picture a green apple? See? So whenever we use words, even though we think it's universal, as something as simple as an apple, it's not 100% the same. The same thing goes for when I say 2 handsome men in a Turkish bath looking at each other longingly while, steam drips from the ceiling or something. So the more specific I realized I could be with language, the closer I could get to creating an image, both in AI's mind, but also in everyone's minds when I describe my work.
Yeah. And I love that question. The majority of the room raise their hands to red apple, and that all of our defaults are probably quite common. And to kind of derive from that, you really need to be very specific to expand those definitions. From your perspective, Nicole, as you're selecting and thinking about submissions for this upcoming sale, are there specific boundaries you're putting on it? Is there any way kind of you would describe that framework?
We're not really taking submissions, but
Sorry.
No. It's not too dissimilar from how we would curate or put together a sale in another category. It's at the end of the day, Christie's is a place where we offer to collectors what they want, right? What the market wants. I think with AI specifically, because it is so early, we also have the responsibility to not just react to the market, right? There are some artists that, not going to name names, but there are some artists in our evening sales that half the people in Christie's are like, this artist sucks, but they'll make however many collectors want it, and that's the job. If collectors want it, that's what Christie should be offering. It's not it's not up to us. We're not museum curators. But I think with AI art, because we are dealing with primary market, there is an education element to it. We do have a responsibility to work with artists or artworks that are using AI in ethical, smart, academic maybe ways that are showing the art collecting community what AI can do in the art world. So I think, it's I think a big misconception that we talked about earlier is that you literally, and what you said, that AI art is just someone writing something in and saying go, and then okay, print, like put it in a frame. Like that's not interesting, and that's not going to be an artist that withstands the test of time. In terms of putting AI art in as a category within art history. Yeah. So we're really looking for artists. I mentioned a few already: Sasha Stiles, Holly Hernan, Bado, Harold Cohen from early days. Yeah. People like that who are using the technology as a tool to do something that they wouldn't be able to do themselves. It's not just AI is not just a way to make art quicker. It's a way to do something that you wouldn't be able to do without it.
I actually have a question that maybe you guys can answer, which is that the impression I get is that a lot of times, both with auction houses and with institutions, what I've observed is that people feel more comfortable if AI-generated art is closer to the abstract side of things than the figurative side. But maybe that's just my imagination.
I haven't seen a stark example. I think most of what I've seen is less realistic, and maybe I'm not talking from anything specific, just anecdotally. Perhaps that's because people are more comfortable knowing that it's fake, right. And you can tell that it's not trying to be a photograph that someone took with a lens. I don't know.
No, I don't think there is a difference between realistic or not. For us, anyway, it's not really producing this type of work in our institution. It's more AI being used as a tool, really, for picturing what's possible, I would say.
Yeah. For people who are interested in getting into collecting AI art, AI-generated art, are there, things that you would suggest that they think about so that their choices are informed, so that they understand how to support the artist, how to engage with the artwork? You mentioned a few things when you were speaking just now, such as ethics. I mean, are there primary principles that a collector wanting to collect AI-generated art needs to consider that is different from painting or sculpture, for example?
I mean, I think you should always, as a collector collecting a new category, you should always go through a trusted source. If you're new to learning who the artist is and what they represent and what their practice is, Fellowship is a great. They represent a lot of AI artists. I'm sure you have other, ways to find, great artists using AI. But I think there's a lot of saturation out there, similar to how it was when the NFT boom happened in 2021. There was everything on OpenSea, and you can't sift through that, right? So how do you actually find the stuff that's important and the stuff that can resonate with you? It's a bit traditional, but I think going through people who are spending the time to sift through that and to help educate is helpful. So whether that's Fellowship, whether that's tuning into the Christie sale in February, talking to Sarp.
Sarp, do you have any input on that question? I'm curious from an artist's perspective, how you would suggest somebody approach this medium.
I would say that the first thing that we need to accept is that 99% of artistic labor happens up here. And so the way in which a work is generated, whether there is a computer or an algorithm or a paintbrush or a camera is involved, that's secondary. And that's not to dismiss any artist who figures out what they do as they build it, because that is very valid. I'm just saying the majority of artistic labor is not this fantasy of someone sweating with a hammer on some marble block, like that romanticized notion that we need to suffer physically to create is very limiting, especially when we consider that So in March, I was sent to the hospital very abruptly, and I'm okay, I'm healthy, but like for 2 months, I could not work. I was recovering. And for the first time in my life, I could use my iPad, not to draw, but to continue making photography. And that entire time I was thinking, what do people do who have imaginations and who have the motivation to make something who do not have access to this technology? And how amazing is it that for the first time in human history, someone doesn't have to go to an MFA program that's going to cost at least $200,000. They don't need to buy an amazing camera kit that, even if it's used, is going to cost several $1,000s. They don't need to do a lot of the sort of physical and commercial hurdles that we have had to go through to start imagining things visually. So it's a great sort of equalizer of opportunity that I'm really excited about.
Yeah.
Because I do think that I'm extremely lucky and that I got to go to America and go get an MFA, and I got to meet the people that I did because I've been involved with the fair for over 15 years now. And I do not represent even a fraction of the artists and the creatives out there. So if this is in fact a question of who you know and how you know them, how well you're educated, then maybe for the first time we can sort of say, hey, you don't have to do any of these. You just have to go online and check this thing out that's free for everyone to use.
Right, it sort of broadens the playing field,
Right.
so to say.
So I'm really excited about the next generation of artists that are going to come up, growing up with this technology.
Yeah. Maybe it would be great to take a look through some of your works at this point.
Sure.
And
The game that I like to call, I can't believe it's not butter, because it's the running joke is that, like, even in images where it's of the golden horn, and I tell people this is AI generated, the response is, okay, but where did you shoot it? And I'm like, I didn't. And they go, but that's the Blue Mosque. I'm like, I know. I did not shoot it. It is a collection of 1 billion images of the Blue Mosque. So it's been really fun toying with the idea of why we want to believe photography, especially when it's in Polaroid format.
Yeah. I'm curious about, sort of, you said you kind of online.
Is it on? Oh, no, it's not on.
No, here, let me press the right button here. Oops. There we go. Jürgen Hesuen, I'm going to say that
Hussein.
correctly. Hussein, beg your pardon. I think this is one of the images you referenced earlier, right? You were speaking about using more traditional kind of Turkish images, and then kind of using kind of your language to create a more dreamlike atmosphere.
So the idea behind these was, and this is this body of work that I've been doing in various different formats, photography and digital art, for the last decade. What would it look like if the Ottoman Empire existed in the 90s? And consequently, what would people wear, what would people do, and who would I be in this imaginary universe? So one of the important things for me was fashion. And I love the designs, the costume designs of Eiko Ishioka, the late Eiko Ishioka, who designed costumes for Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, for Tarsem's The Fall, just sort of traditional, historic, and sort of Middle Eastern-centric outfits with flair. So in addition to describing who I wanted to see, I was describing what they should be wearing at all times to make it more believable that this is coming from an intentional universe.
Yeah. I really love this series. You guys are going to get a treat here. Oops. Hotel Day, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the concept here.
My first job was at a hotel, and I loved the bellboy uniform. So I was trying to imagine, like, if I had been in this imaginary Ottoman Empire in the 90s, would I also still be at a hotel working, and then who would I become friends with? And what narratives would unfold in that imaginary universe? So am I witnessing something romantic? Am I witnessing something clandestine? A lot of these are sort of scenes from an imaginary movie that's constantly playing in my head.
I love, oops.
Are these physical Polaroids?
These are physical Polaroids that I have exposed AI-generated images onto. Okay. And this is one of my favorite portraits because a lot of times I'm toying with the idea of how gender is represented and whether Midjourney can understand it if I want to see a female representing figure that doesn't fit the traditional gender mold. Turkey has a long history, at the Ottoman Empire, has a long history of drag that is very different than Western drag. So I was trying to imagine what nightlife would be like, what queer characters I would meet at night in this imaginary Istanbul.
So fascinating. How do you exactly do that with the Polaroid? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So there's a device called the Polaroid Lab, where the
Okay.
top of it is like a scanner bed or an enlarger with a
Okay.
lens in it. You have the image on your phone with a timer that's queued up to align with the device. You set it down, and then you expose it onto the film that is a traditional Polaroid film. So you're basically tricking the film into thinking it received it from a camera.
Right.
And as a result, I'm human washing the AI-generated image.
It's fascinating.
So again, more scenes from this imaginary light life situation.
Yeah. I wanted to capture one of these dreamy ones that you had sent over. I'm not sure. I think this might be the last one. And maybe you can give us a bit of background on this piece?
This is my favorite character. His name is Shefik, and one of the things that people ask me often is, when you create a character, can you create him again? Can you come back to it? And I figured out how to actually do that, because I imagined that if I were in this space, sometimes I would make friends, and then I would see that friend again and again and again. And in this case, this would be an imaginary Jenn, which is a Turkish male belly dancer that I met in a nightclub. And then there are various scenes throughout the series where we're out together by the Bosphorus, or we're at a different club, or he's performing and I'm watching him. So I'm inserting myself as a voyeur,
Yeah.
as an Orientalist, but as an auto-Orientalist, but also as a photographer in this universe. And one of the hardest things to do is, how do you have a consistent visual language with that? So I always say shot on Carl Zeiss 55mm lens, because that creates the physical distance. With most Polaroid cameras, this is the standard distance for a portrait. So I wanted to feel like I only had one camera around my neck this entire journey.
And you can tell it that this is shot with a Carl Zeiss lens, and it'll kind of interpret that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so fascinating.
Because that's universal. That's in the metadata of most cameras.
Right. It'll read that.
So,
It'll know
yeah.
what that is.
Better than
So
handsome man in
interesting.
Turkey. It'll be like 55mm lens.
Beginning.
I know what that's supposed to look like.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for walking through your artworks today. Thank you
you.
very much to the rest of the panel for taking part here.
Thank
Are
you
there
for
any
having us.
questions in the audience?
We have a question.
Thank you. I guess this is directed at Sarp, specifically because I know your practice. But the way you create these scenes is based on, as you said, a million different images, and the output is based on what's there. What are the limitations you found to what you're given? Because I imagine that the internet is full of images told in very specific stories by very specific people or places. And if you're looking for something different, how hard is it to get that?
Excuse me.
That was the AI overlord getting mad at you for asking me that question. Actually, to go back to what Marc-Olivier said about like the first photographs trying to be more painterly, Midjourney is trained on a lot of classical images where the composition favors people in the middle who are lit quite evenly or lit from one light source so the shadows are dramatic. And if you want to go outside of that, then you have to really force it to look at movies instead. Which is why I mentioned earlier the director Alejandro Jodorowsky, who's one of my favorite directors, but also the way he uses lighting and the way he makes it a little bit soft and a little bit sepia is not something that Midjourney is classically inclined to give you. So instead of saying, give me sepia light, give me this, give me that, which are going to be abstract requests, if I say, hey, look at Jodorowsky's films and use that visual language, then that becomes common ground for us. And in terms of Orientalism, it actually fails quite lovely, in lovely ways, where if I want Turkish tiles, the tiles are wrong half the time, or they're Moroccan tiles, or they're Persian tiles, which maybe most people won't know, but I know, because I know what I'm looking for. So then I have to iterate again and again and again until it gives me the tulip tiles in the Blue Mosque.
Any more questions from the crowd?
You should build now your own program for the piece, because that's the piece that was the theme of your own conference today.
Well, the program itself, I like that it resists me. I like that it fails. Part of the exploration and part of why I'm excited about it is the room for misunderstanding, because that is part of Orientalism. So I'm not interested in doing these because it gives answers. I'm interested in it because it's asking these questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today, everybody. Hope you enjoy the rest of the afternoon.